A racist luxury hotel manager named Michael humiliates and evicts a black woman, believing that people like her don't fit the hotel's image. But what happens next changes everything. How will the black woman respond, and will she seek revenge? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Thompson stood at the polished reception desk of the Oak Ridge Hotel, his eyes scanning the grand lobby with a mixture of pride and scrutiny. At 45 years old, he cut an imposing figure in his tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. Every detail of the hotel, from the gleaming marble floors to the crystal chandeliers, reflected his unwavering standards of excellence. For Michael, the Oak Ridge wasn't just a hotel, it was a testament to his life's work. He had climbed the ladder of success, rung by rung, starting as a bellhop in his early 20s and working his way up to become the manager of one of the most prestigious hotels in the city. The journey hadn't been easy, but Michael's determination and attention to detail had set him apart. As he watched the well-heeled guests mingle in the lobby, Michael felt a sense of satisfaction. These were the kind of people he believed belonged in the Oak Ridge, successful, refined, and able to appreciate the finer things in life. He had grown up in a wealthy neighborhood, surrounded by people who looked and acted a certain way, and those early experiences had shaped his view of the world. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," chirped Sarah, one of the receptionists. "The Hendersons have just checked in for their annual stay." Michael nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Make sure their usual suite is prepared to perfection. The Hendersons are exactly the type of guests we want to keep coming back." As he turned to walk towards his office, Michael's eyes narrowed at a young couple who had just entered the hotel. Their clothes weren't quite up to the Oak Ridge standard, and they seemed overwhelmed by the grandeur of the lobby. Michael felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the kind he always felt when he sensed someone didn't belong. "Sarah," he said quietly, "keep an eye on those two. Make sure they're actually guests and not just wandering in off the street." Sarah looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Yes, Mr. Thompson." As Michael entered his office and closed the door behind him, he took a deep breath. He knew some people might call him prejudiced or elitist, but in his mind, he was simply maintaining standards. The Oak Ridge had a reputation to uphold, and it was his job to protect it. Little did Michael know that his deeply ingrained beliefs were about to be challenged in ways he never expected. The gleaming glass doors of the Oak Ridge Hotel swung open, and Grace Williams stepped into the opulent lobby. At 35 years old, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that immediately drew attention. Her warm brown eyes took in the grandeur around her, a soft smile playing on her lips. Grace smoothed down her bright sleeveless turquoise dress and adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase. She had been looking forward to this weekend conference for months. As the keynote speaker, she felt a mix of excitement and responsibility weighing on her shoulders. As she approached the reception desk, Grace's heels clicked softly on the polished marble floor. The sound caught Michael Thompson's attention, and he looked up from a conversation with one of his staff members. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in Grace's appearance. "Good afternoon," Grace said warmly to the receptionist. "I'm Grace Williams, checking in for the Leadership in Action conference." The young woman behind the desk beamed at Grace. "Of course, Ms. Williams. We're honored to have you with us. I've heard wonderful things about your work." Grace chuckled softly. "That's very kind of you to say. I'm just happy to be here and share what I've learned over the years." As the receptionist began the check-in process, Michael made his way over, his face a careful mask of professionalism. "Ms. Williams," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Michael Thompson, the hotel manager. Welcome to the Oak Ridge." Grace shook his hand firmly, her smile never wavering. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You have a beautiful hotel here." Michael nodded, his posture stiff. "We pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards. I trust you'll find everything to your satisfaction during your stay." "I'm sure I will," Grace replied, her voice warm but her eyes sharp, noting the coolness in Michael's tone. As Grace turned back to the receptionist to complete her check-in, Michael lingered for a moment, his brow furrowed. Something about Grace's presence unsettled him, challenging his long-held beliefs about who belonged in his hotel. He watched as she graciously thanked the receptionist and made her way to the elevators, her head held high. As Grace settled into the hotel lobby, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. His eyes kept darting back to her, his brow furrowed with growing unease. The sight of Grace, confidently chatting with other guests, stirred a mix of emotions he couldn't quite place. Unable to contain his skepticism any longer, Michael approached Grace with a forced smile. "Excuse me, Ms. Williams," he said, his voice carrying a hint of condescension. "I hope you're finding everything satisfactory." Grace turned to him, her warm smile unwavering. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Thompson. The hotel is lovely." Michael nodded stiffly, then cleared his throat. "I couldn't help but notice your presence here. Are you sure there hasn't been some mix-up with your reservation?" Grace's eyebrows raised slightly, but her composure remained intact. "I'm quite certain there's no mistake. I'm here for the Leadership in Action conference. As the keynote speaker, in fact." Michael's eyes widened for a moment before he regained his cool demeanor. "I see. It's just that we don't usually... Well, our clientele tends to be of a certain caliber." The lobby seemed to grow quiet as nearby guests turned to watch the exchange. Grace stood a little straighter, her voice calm but firm. "And what caliber would that be, Mr. Thompson?" Michael fumbled for words, realizing he had stepped onto dangerous ground. "I simply meant that our guests are typically, well, they're successful, accomplished, professional," Grace supplied, her gaze steady. "I assure you, Mr. Thompson, I meet all those criteria and more." The tension in the air was palpable. Other guests began to whisper among themselves, their eyes darting between Grace and Michael. Michael's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. He couldn't back down now, not in front of his staff and other guests. His pride wouldn't allow it. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice rising, "I'm afraid I'll need to see some proof of your reservation and your supposed role in this conference. We've had issues with fraud attempts in the past." Grace's eyes widened in disbelief. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with hurt. Michael continued, his words growing louder and more accusatory. "It's not uncommon for people to try and take advantage of our establishment. I'm simply doing my job to protect the integrity of the Oak Ridge Hotel." By now, a small crowd had gathered in the lobby. Guests paused on their way to elevators, and staff members exchanged worried glances. Grace took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you there's no fraud here. I have my confirmation email and ID right here." She reached for her phone, but Michael waved her off. "Anyone can fake an email," he scoffed. "I find it hard to believe that someone like you would be the keynote speaker at a prestigious conference in our hotel." Gasps echoed through the lobby. Grace's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she stood her ground. "Someone like me? I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Thompson, but I can assure you—" Michael cut her off, his voice booming across the lobby. "I'm implying that you don't belong here. This is a high-class establishment and we have standards to uphold." The lobby fell silent. Grace's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice remained strong. "Your prejudice is showing, Mr. Thompson. I've never been so insulted in my life." Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. Some guests shook their heads in disgust, while others looked away uncomfortably. Michael's staff shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with their manager's behavior. But Michael, blinded by his arrogance and prejudice, couldn't see the damage he was causing. He stood there, chest puffed out, convinced he was in the right. Michael's face hardened as he made his decision. He turned to the front desk and barked, "Call security, now." The young receptionist hesitated, her eyes darting between Michael and Grace. But under Michael's stern glare, she picked up the phone with trembling hands. Grace's heart sank. She couldn't believe this was happening. "Please," she said, her voice quivering. "There's no need for this. I have my reservation right here." She fumbled with her phone, trying to pull up the email. But Michael wouldn't hear it. He crossed his arms and stared at Grace with cold eyes. Save your excuses. Security will escort you out." Within minutes, two burly men in dark uniforms appeared in the lobby. They approached Grace, their faces impassive. "This woman needs to be removed from the premises," Michael said, his voice dripping with disdain. Grace felt all eyes on her. The shame and humiliation burned in her chest. She looked around, hoping someone would speak up, but the other guests just watched in uncomfortable silence. "I'm telling you, there's been a mistake," Grace pleaded, her voice cracking. She held out her phone to the security guards. "Look, here's my reservation. I'm supposed to be here." One of the guards glanced at the screen, then looked to Michael for direction. Michael shook his head. "It could be fake. I want her out." Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes. She blinked them back, determined not to cry in front of these people. "This is wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The security guards gently but firmly took hold of Grace's arms. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one of them said. As they led her towards the exit, Grace felt a wave of powerlessness wash over her. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being treated like a criminal. The injustice of it all made her want to scream, but she held her head high, refusing to give Michael the satisfaction of seeing her break down. Just before they reached the doors, Grace turned back to face Michael. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "And one day, you'll realize just how wrong you were." With those words, Grace was escorted out of the Oak Ridge Hotel, leaving behind a lobby full of stunned onlookers and a smug Michael Thompson. As Grace was being escorted out, an older gentleman in an impeccable suit stood up from his seat in the lobby. His eyes, filled with disbelief and anger, followed the scene unfolding before him. This was Mr. Carter, a well-known philanthropist and a regular guest at the Oak Ridge Hotel. Mr. Carter had been quietly observing the entire incident, his frown deepening with each passing moment. He recognized Grace Williams immediately. She was a rising star in the world of social justice, someone he had supported in various charitable endeavors. As the lobby doors closed behind Grace, Mr. Carter's patience snapped. He strode purposefully towards Michael, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. "Mr. Thompson," he called out, his voice ringing clear and authoritative across the now silent lobby. "I demand an explanation for what just transpired here." Michael turned, surprised to see Mr. Carter addressing him. He quickly composed himself, plastering on a practiced smile. "Mr. Carter, I apologize for the disturbance. We had to remove an individual who was attempting to—" "Stop right there," Mr. Carter interrupted, holding up a hand. His eyes flashed with barely contained fury. "That individual you just humiliated and threw out is Grace Williams, a respected lawyer and humanitarian. I know her personally." Michael's smile faltered. He hadn't expected this complication. "Sir, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. We have strict policies." "The only misunderstanding here," Mr. Carter said, his voice low but intense, "is your appalling behavior. I witnessed everything, Mr. Thompson. Your treatment of Ms. Williams was not only unprofessional, but deeply offensive." Other guests in the lobby began to whisper among themselves, watching the confrontation with growing interest. Michael glanced around nervously, acutely aware of the attention they were attracting. "Mr. Carter," Michael said, trying to regain control of the situation, "I assure you, I was only doing my job. If there's been a mistake—" "A mistake?" Mr. Carter's voice rose slightly. "What I saw was blatant discrimination. You didn't even bother to check her reservation properly. You made assumptions based solely on her appearance. That, Mr. Thompson, is not doing your job. It's prejudice, plain and simple." The color drained from Michael's face as Mr. Carter's words sank in. The lobby had grown eerily quiet, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Mr. Carter continued, his voice steady but filled with disappointment. "Do you have any idea who Grace Williams is, Mr. Thompson? She's not just any guest, she's the keynote speaker at the charity gala being held here this weekend." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the onlooking crowd. Michael's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. "But that's not all," Mr. Carter pressed on, his gaze unwavering. "Ms. Williams is also a significant benefactor of your hotel's parent company, Her contributions have helped fund numerous community outreach programs. The weight of this revelation seemed to physically push Michael back a step. He gripped the edge of the reception desk for support, his knuckles turning white. I had no idea," Michael stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Of course you didn't," Mr. Carter replied, his tone sharp. "You were too busy judging her based on her appearance to bother finding out who she really was." The lobby remained silent, the tension palpable. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "Your actions today, Mr. Thompson, have not only humiliated a remarkable woman, but have also potentially damaged the reputation of this hotel and its parent company," Mr. Carter continued. "I wonder what the board will think when they hear about this incident." Michael's face paled even further at the mention of the board. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The gravity of his mistake was beginning to sink in, leaving him stunned and speechless. The news of Michael's actions spread like wildfire through the hotel. Within hours, whispers of the incident had reached the ears of the hotel's board members. By nightfall, Michael found himself in a small conference room, facing a panel of stern-faced executives. "Mr. Thompson, we're deeply troubled by the reports we've received," said Mrs. Jameson, the head of the board. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were filled with disappointment. "Your actions today go against everything our company stands for." Michael sat rigid in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The weight of his mistake pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from your position as hotel manager," Mrs. Jameson continued. "We will be conducting a thorough investigation into this incident." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. What could he say? He knew he had messed it up badly. As Michael left the conference room, he noticed the hushed conversations and sidelong glances from the hotel staff. News traveled fast, and he could feel the judgment in their eyes. Back in his office, Michael's phone buzzed incessantly. Social media was ablaze with accounts of what had happened. Angry comments flooded the hotel's pages, condemning Michael's actions and calling for his permanent removal. Oak Ridge Hotel racism was trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of discrimination. The negative attention was overwhelming, and Michael felt a deep sense of shame wash over him. As he packed up his personal belongings, Michael caught sight of his reflection in the office window. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. How had he let his prejudices cloud his judgment so severely? With a heavy heart, Michael walked out of the hotel, unsure if he would ever return. The weight of his actions and their consequences followed him like a shadow, leaving him to wonder how he could ever make things right. Michael sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. His phone lay silent beside him, a stark reminder of how quickly his world had crumbled. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room. The realization of how badly he had messed up hit him like a punch to the gut. His career, the thing he had worked so hard for, was hanging by a thread. And for what? Because he couldn't see past his own prejudices? Michael's mind raced with worries about his future. Would he ever be able to work in hospitality again? The thought of starting over from scratch at his age made him feel sick. He picked up his phone, scrolling through the endless stream of angry comments and news articles about the incident. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of his career. "I have to fix this," Michael muttered, pacing his small apartment. But how? He considered reaching out to Grace directly to apologize, but would that make things worse? Would she even want to hear from him after what he'd done? The idea of facing her again filled him with shame, but he knew he had to do something. Sitting around feeling sorry for himself wouldn't solve anything. Michael grabbed a notepad and began jotting down ideas. Maybe if he could show that he was truly sorry and willing to change, there might be a chance to salvage his career. But would anyone believe him? Or would they just see it as a desperate attempt to save face? As the night wore on, Michael's desperation grew. He needed to find a way to make things right, not just for his career, but because it was the right thing to do. The question was, where could he even begin? The next morning, Michael's phone rang. startling him from his restless sleep. He fumbled for the device, his heart racing when he saw an unfamiliar number. With trembling fingers, he answered, "Hello, Mr. Thompson. This is Grace Williams." Michael's breath caught in his throat. "Ms. Williams, I'm so sorry for—" "Please let me speak," Grace interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "What happened yesterday was unacceptable, but I believe in second chances, Mr. Thompson." Michael listened, stunned, as Grace continued. "Instead of pursuing legal action, I have a proposition for you," she said. "I want you to volunteer at the Oakwood Community Center in my neighborhood, 3 days a week, for the next month." Michael's mind reeled. Volunteer? But why? "Because, Mr. Thompson, you need to learn about the lives of those you so quickly judged," Grace explained. "This is your chance to open your eyes and your heart." Michael hesitated. The idea of stepping into a world so different from his own terrified him. But he knew this might be his only shot at redemption. I'll do it," he said softly. "Good," Grace replied. "Be at the center tomorrow at 9 a.m. And Mr. Thompson, come with an open mind." As the call ended, Michael sat in silence. A mix of fear and hope swirled in his chest. Could this really be his path to making things right? He spent the rest of the day in a daze, wondering what awaited him at the community center. Would people there know who he was? How would they treat him? As night fell, Michael lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be the start of something new, something that could change everything. He just hoped he was ready for it. The next morning, Michael stood outside the Oakwood Community Center, his polished shoes a stark contrast to the cracked sidewalk beneath them. He tugged at his collar, feeling stifled in his usual crisp suit. The building before him was modest, its faded paint and weathered sign a far cry from the luxury he was accustomed to. Taking a deep breath, Mikhail pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped inside. The interior was clean but worn, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in children's artwork. The smell of coffee and disinfectant mingled in the air. "You must be Michael," a warm voice called out. A woman in her 50s approached him, her smile genuine despite the wrinkles around her eyes. "I'm Linda, the center's director. Grace called to let us know you'd be joining us." Michael nodded stiffly, unsure of how to respond. "Yes, that's me. I'm here to volunteer." Linda's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Well, we're glad to have you. Let me show you around and explain what we do here." As they walked through the building, Linda pointed out various rooms and activities. "Over there is our food pantry. We serve hot meals and distribute groceries to families in need. That room is for after-school tutoring, and down the hall is our job skills training center." Michael's eyes widened as he took in the scope of services offered. He had never realized how many different needs a community center might address. "And this," Linda said, opening a door to reveal a small, cluttered office, "is where you'll be helping me with paperwork and scheduling. We run on a tight budget, so every bit of help counts." Michael stared at the outdated computer and stacks of papers. It was a far cry from his state-of-the-art office at the hotel. He swallowed hard, realizing just how out of his depth he truly was. Linda must have sensed his discomfort. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "I know this is all new to you, Michael, but give it a chance. You might be surprised by what you learn here." Michael stepped into the bustling after-school room, his eyes widening at the sight before him. Children of various ages were scattered around, some huddled over homework, others engaged in noisy games. The cacophony of voices and laughter was a stark contrast to the quiet, orderly halls of his hotel. Linda guided him to a table where a group of young children sat coloring. "Michael, why don't you help these kids with their art project? They're making thank you cards for our donors." He nodded stiffly, approaching the table with hesitation. "Hello, children," he said formally, his voice barely audible over the din. A little girl with pigtails looked up at him, her eyes curious. "Are you a businessman?" she asked, pointing at his suit. Michael cleared his throat. Yes, I suppose I am." "Can you help me color this flower?" another child asked, thrusting a half-finished drawing at him. Michael took the crayon awkwardly, his hand hovering over the paper. He couldn't remember the last time he'd done something as simple as coloring. "I'm not sure I'm the best person for this task," he muttered. As he attempted to help, Michael found himself growing increasingly frustrated. The children were messy, their colorful scribbles going outside the lines. Some argued over crayons, while others seemed more interested in chatting than completing their cards. "Please, let's try to focus," Michael said, his voice strained as he tried to maintain order. But the children paid little attention to his attempts at discipline. A boy accidentally knocked over a cup of water, spilling it across the table. Michael jumped back, narrowly avoiding the splash. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" he exclaimed, his patience wearing thin. Linda appeared at his side, quickly mopping up the spill with a smile. "It's okay, accidents happen," she said cheerfully to the boy, who looked on the verge of tears. Michael watched, bewildered by her calm demeanor. How could she remain so composed in this chaos? He felt out of place and overwhelmed, longing for the predictability and control he had at the hotel. As the afternoon wore on, Michael found himself counting the minutes until he could leave. The children's energy seemed endless, and he struggled to find common ground with them. Their world was so different from his own, and he felt like a fish out of water. As the days passed, Michael's discomfort at the community center began to shift. He found himself observing the people around him more closely, noticing details he'd previously overlooked. One afternoon, he overheard a conversation between two mothers waiting to pick up their children. They spoke in hushed tones about the struggle to make ends meet, discussing which bills they could afford to pay that month. "I'm behind on rent again," one woman sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know how I'm going to explain it to the landlord this time." Her friend nodded sympathetically. "I know how you feel. I had to choose between groceries and my son's asthma medication last week. It's not right that we have to make these kinds of choices." Michael felt a twinge in his chest. He'd never had to worry about such basic necessities. The reality of their struggles began to sink in. Later that week, he noticed a teenage boy helping younger kids with their homework. The boy's clothes were worn and a size too small, but his patience and kindness shone through as he explained math problems. "That's Marcus," Linda explained, noticing Michael's gaze. "He's been coming here since he was little. Brilliant kid, but his family can't afford to send him to college. He's hoping for a scholarship." Michael thought about the opportunities he'd had in his own life, opportunities he'd taken for granted. He realized how different Marcus's path was from his own, simply because of circumstances beyond the boy's control. As he walked home that evening, Michael passed a rundown apartment building. He saw families crowded onto small balconies, children playing in the narrow alley between buildings. It was a far cry from the spacious, manicured grounds of his hotel. For the first time, Michael began to truly see the community around him. He saw the resilience in people's faces as they faced daily challenges. He saw the strength in their communities as they supported one another. And he saw the unfairness of a system that made life so much harder for some than others. These experiences started to chip away at Michael's long-held beliefs. He began to question the assumptions he'd made about people based on their appearance or background. The harsh realities he witnessed were forcing him to confront his own prejudices and privilege. The next day, Grace arrived at the community center to find Michael looking lost in thought. She approached him with a gentle smile. "Ready for that tour I promised?" Michael nodded, his usual confidence noticeably absent. As they stepped out onto the bustling streets, Grace began to share her story. "I grew up just a few blocks from here," she said, pointing to a modest apartment building. "My mom worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads." Michael listened, his eyes taking in the worn facades of the buildings and the people hurrying by. Grace's words painted a picture of struggle and perseverance he'd never truly considered before. As they walked, Grace pointed out landmarks from her childhood. "That's where I went to school," she said, gesturing to a weathered brick building. "We didn't have enough textbooks, so we had to share. But our teachers were amazing. They believed in us when no one else did." Michael felt a pang of guilt, remembering his own well-funded private school education. He'd never imagined the challenges students faced in underfunded schools. They passed a small park where children played on outdated equipment. "This was my favorite place," Grace said, her eyes twinkling with nostalgia. "We didn't have much, but we had each other. The community always looked out for its own." As they continued their walk, Michael noticed the warmth with which people greeted Grace. Neighbors called out hellos and shopkeepers waved from their storefronts. It was a far cry from the cold, impersonal interactions he was used to in his world of luxury hotels. Grace shared stories of community fundraisers for families in need, of neighbors helping each other through tough times. Michael began to see the strength and resilience that ran through the community like a golden thread. "It wasn't easy growing up here," Grace admitted, "but it taught me valuable lessons. I learned the importance of hard work, compassion, and never giving up." Michael felt a deep sense of humility wash over him. He'd judged this community, and Grace, based on superficial assumptions. Now, seeing the rich tapestry of lives and experiences around him, he realized how wrong he'd been. As the days passed, Michael found himself settling into a routine at the community center. The initial discomfort he felt began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of connection to the people he encountered each day. One afternoon, while helping with the after-school program, Michael noticed a young boy named Carlos struggling with his math homework. Hesitantly, Michael approached him. "Need some help?" he asked, pulling up a chair. Carlos looked up, his eyes wary. "I guess," he shrugged. Michael spent the next hour patiently working through problems with Carlos. As the boy's frustration turned to understanding, Michael felt a warmth spread through his chest. It was a feeling he'd never experienced in his years of managing high-end hotels. Over the next few weeks, Michael found himself looking forward to his time at the center. He learned the names of the regular volunteers and the children who attended the programs. He discovered that Maria, a single mother of 3, had dreams of becoming a nurse. He learned that Darnell, a quiet teenager, had a talent for drawing that rivaled any artist Michael had seen. During an art session, Michael sat next to Lisa, a bubbly 8-year-old with a gap-toothed smile. As she painted, she chattered away about her dream of becoming a chef. "I'm gonna have my own restaurant one day," she declared, her brush creating vibrant swirls on the paper. Michael found himself smiling. "I bet you will," he said, meaning it. "What kind of food will you serve?" As Lisa described her imaginary menu, Michael realized how much he'd been missing by judging people based on their circumstances. These children had hopes and dreams, just as valid as anyone he'd met in his previous life. One day, as Michael helped clean up after a busy afternoon, he overheard 2 volunteers talking. "Have you noticed how different Mr. Thompson is now?" one said. "He's really connecting with the kids." The other nodded. "It's like he's a whole new person. Did you see him playing basketball with the teens yesterday?" Michael paused, a broom in his hand. He realized they were right. He had changed. The prejudices that had once clouded his vision were slowly melting away, replaced by genuine care and respect for the people he'd come to know. As Michael was helping to clean up after a busy art session, he heard a commotion from the other side of the room. He turned to see Carlos, a quiet 19-year-old teenager he'd been working with, throw himself on a sofa and collapse into tears. Michael froze for a moment, unsure of how to react. In his old life, he would have called for someone else to handle the situation. But here, in this place where he was learning to see people differently, he knew he had to step up. Hesitantly, he approached Carlos, who was now curled up in a corner, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael knelt down beside him, feeling completely out of his depth. "Carlos?" he said softly. "What's wrong, buddy?" Carlos looked up, his face streaked with tears. "They're gonna take my mom away," he choked out between sobs. Michael felt a pang in his chest. He remembered overhearing that Carlos's mother was struggling with addiction. In the past, he might have judged her harshly. Now, he saw the pain it was causing this little boy. "I'm so sorry, Carlos," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. He hesitated, then gently put his arm around the boy's shoulders. To his surprise, Carlos leaned into him, crying harder. As he held the sobbing teenager, Michael felt his own eyes welling up. He thought about all the times he'd dismissed people's struggles, believing their problems were simply the result of poor choices. Now, holding this heartbroken boy, he realized how wrong he'd been. "It's not fair," Carlos whimpered. "Why can't she just get better?" Michael took a deep breath, searching for the right words. Sometimes people have a hard time getting better even when they want to," he said carefully. "But that doesn't mean your mom doesn't love you, Carlos, and it doesn't mean you're alone." As he spoke, Michael realized he truly meant what he was saying. He felt a fierce protectiveness for Carlos and the other children at the center. These kids, who he once would have written off, now meant more to him than he could have imagined. As the days passed, Michael found himself spending more time at the community center, his perspective slowly shifting with each interaction. One evening, as he was helping Grace clean up after a particularly busy day, she paused and looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, Michael," Grace began, her voice soft but strong, "I think it's time I shared more of my story with you." Michael nodded, sensing the importance of the moment. They sat down at a small table in the corner of the room, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the floor. Grace took a deep breath and started, "Growing up, I faced challenges that you might never have imagined. From a young age, I learned that the color of my skin often determined how people saw me, before they even knew my name." Michael listened intently, feeling a mix of shame and curiosity. Grace continued, her eyes distant as she recalled her past. "I remember being followed around stores, accused of stealing when I was just browsing. I've been pulled over by police for no reason other than looking suspicious. Even as I worked my way through law school, there were people who assumed I was there because of affirmative action, not my own hard work and intelligence." Michael felt a lump form in his throat. He had never considered how these daily indignities could wear a person down. Grace's voice grew stronger as she went on, "But I refused to let those experiences define me. Instead, they fueled my determination to succeed and to help others who face similar challenges." As she spoke, Michael saw Grace in a new light. He realized that her strength and compassion weren't just personality traits, but hard-won qualities forged through years of adversity. "Grace, I don't know what to say," Michael admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I never understood. I knew racism existed, but I didn't realize how deeply it affected people's lives every day." Grace reached out and patted his hand gently. "That's why I'm sharing this with you, Michael. Understanding comes from hearing each other's stories and really listening." Michael nodded, feeling a profound shift in his worldview. He looked at Grace with newfound respect and admiration, seeing not just her accomplishments, but the journey that led her there. As the days turned into weeks, Michael found himself increasingly invested in the lives of the people at the community center. He began to notice the small details he'd once overlooked: the worn-out shoes of a single mother rushing to her second job, the hollow look in a teenager's eyes as he spoke about his struggles in school. One afternoon, while helping a group of children with their homework, Michael had a sudden realization. He saw how his past actions, his prejudices, and his dismissive attitude had contributed to the very problems these families faced every day. The weight of this understanding hit him hard, and he had to excuse himself for a moment to collect his thoughts. Standing in the hallway, Michael leaned against the wall, his mind racing. He thought about all the times he'd turned away people from his hotel based on snap judgments, how he'd treated Grace that fateful day. Each memory now felt like a personal failure, a betrayal of the basic human decency he'd always claimed to uphold. As he returned to the classroom, Michael saw the children in a new light. He no longer saw them as charity cases or statistics, but as individuals with hopes, dreams, and potential. He found himself genuinely caring about their progress, celebrating their small victories and feeling their disappointments as if they were his own. This growing empathy began to challenge everything Michael had once believed about success, worth, and who deserved to be in places like his hotel. He started questioning the values he'd held so firmly for years. The pursuit of exclusivity and luxury that had once driven him now seemed hollow, in comparison to the genuine connections he was forming at the community center. One evening, as Michael was leaving the center, He overheard a conversation between two volunteers. They were discussing the difficulties of finding affordable housing in the area. Michael paused, realizing that he had never before considered how his hotel's policies might contribute to gentrification and displacement in the neighborhood. This moment of clarity sparked a cascade of questions in Michael's mind. He began to examine every aspect of his life and career through this new lens of empathy and understanding. The certainty he once felt about his place in the world and the righteousness of his actions began to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of responsibility and a desire to make amends. As Michael's time at the community center continued, an unexpected crisis thrust him into a situation that would test his newfound empathy and understanding. One chilly autumn afternoon, the center's ancient heating system sputtered and died, leaving the building without warmth just as temperatures outside plummeted. The director, Ms. Johnson, looked overwhelmed as she tried to figure out how to keep the center open for the children who relied on its after-school programs. Michael overheard Ms. Johnson's frantic phone calls trying to find an affordable repair service that could come quickly. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice steady and determined, "let me handle this." Drawing on his years of experience managing hotel operations, Michael sprang into action. He called in a favor from a maintenance company he knew, explaining the urgency of the situation. Within an hour, a repair crew was on site. While they waited, Michael organized the volunteers and children. He set up warm drink stations, distributed blankets, and arranged group activities to keep everyone moving and warm. His natural leadership skills, once used to maintain an air of exclusivity, now served to create a sense of community and comfort. As he moved through the center, Michael noticed a young girl shivering in a thin jacket. Without hesitation, he took off his own coat and draped it over her shoulders. The girl looked up at him with grateful eyes, and Michael felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with physical temperature. When the repairs were complete and heat once again flowed through the building, Michael found himself surrounded by thankful children, volunteers, and staff. Ms. Johnson approached him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Michael," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you. What you did today, it means everything to these kids, to all of us." Michael looked around at the smiling faces, feeling a sense of fulfillment he'd never experienced in all his years of hotel management. In that moment, he realized that true leadership wasn't about maintaining an image or enforcing rules. It was about caring for others, about using one's skills and resources to make a real difference in people's lives. This realization hit Michael like a thunderbolt. He felt something shift inside him, as if the last remnants of his old self were falling away. The Michael who had humiliated Grace in the hotel lobby seemed like a stranger now, a distant memory of a man he no longer recognized or wanted to be. Michael's experience at the community center had profoundly changed him. As he drove home that evening, his mind raced with ideas and possibilities. He no longer saw his job at the hotel as just a means to maintain an elite status quo. Instead, he envisioned it as a powerful tool for positive change. The next morning, Michael arrived at the Oak Ridge Hotel with a new sense of purpose. He marched straight to the boardroom where a meeting about his suspension was taking place. Without hesitation, he knocked on the door and entered. "I have a proposal," Michael announced, his voice filled with conviction. The board members looked at him with surprise and curiosity. Michael took a deep breath and began to outline his vision. He proposed a partnership between the Oak Ridge Hotel and the community center, offering job training programs and employment opportunities for disadvantaged youth. "We have the resources to make a real difference," Michael explained passionately. "We can open doors for people who've never had these opportunities before." As he spoke, Michael could see the board members' expressions changing from skepticism to interest. He detailed plans for mentorship programs where hotel staff could share their expertise with aspiring hospitality workers from the community. "This isn't just about charity," Michael emphasized. "It's about creating a more diverse, vibrant workforce that will ultimately benefit our hotel and our guests." Michael's enthusiasm was contagious. By the end of his impromptu presentation, even the most conservative board members were nodding in agreement. They saw not only the potential for positive PR, but also the genuine value in Michael's proposal. With the board's tentative approval, Michael felt a surge of excitement. He couldn't wait to share the news with Grace and the team at the community center. As he left the boardroom, he realized that this was just the beginning of his new mission. Michael stepped through the grand entrance of the Oak Ridge Hotel, his heart pounding. The familiar scent of polished wood and fresh flowers filled the air, but everything felt different now. He straightened his tie, trying to project confidence he didn't quite feel. As he walked across the lobby, Michael noticed the stares and whispers. Some employees quickly averted their eyes, while others watched him with open curiosity. He caught sight of Sarah, the front desk manager, and offered a small smile. She returned it hesitantly, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Welcome back, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said softly as he approached. "Thank you, Sarah," Michael replied, his voice warmer than it had ever been before. "It's good to be back." He could sense the uncertainty in her voice, the lingering doubt about his character. It stung, but Michael understood. He had a lot to prove. As he made his way to his office, Michael passed by a group of guests who were checking in. He overheard snippets of their conversation. "Isn't that the manager who... I heard he's been volunteering. Do you think he's really changed?" Michael felt their eyes on him, some filled with skepticism, others with curiosity. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that this was part of the process. His actions moving forward would speak louder than any words he could say. Entering his office, Michael found everything exactly as he had left it. Yet it all seemed different through his new perspective. The plaques and awards that once filled him with pride now felt hollow. He realized that true success wasn't measured by accolades, but by the positive impact one could make on others' lives. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was James, one of the bellhops Michael had always considered a model employee. "Mr. Thompson," James said, his voice hesitant. "The staff. We were wondering if you could address us. There's been a lot of talk, and we're not sure what to expect now that you're back." Michael nodded, understanding the importance of this moment. "Of course, James, please gather everyone in the main conference room in an hour. It's time we had an honest conversation." As James left, Michael sat at his desk, preparing himself for the challenging task ahead. He knew that rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort, but for the first time in his career, he felt ready to be truly vulnerable with his team. Michael stood at the podium, his hands gripping the edges tightly. The conference room was packed with hotel staff, reporters, and local community leaders. Cameras flashed, and a low murmur filled the air. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for what he knew would be one of the most important moments of his life. "Good morning, everyone," Michael began, his voice wavering slightly. "I've called this meeting today to address my past actions and to chart a new course for the Oak Ridge Hotel." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some were skeptical, others curious. He spotted Grace Williams in the back of the room, offering an encouraging nod. "First and foremost, I want to offer my deepest and most sincere apology," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger. "My treatment of Ms. Grace Williams was inexcusable. It was rooted in prejudice and ignorance, and it goes against everything this hotel should stand for." Michael's eyes began to water, but he pressed on. "I've spent the past few weeks volunteering at a community center, and it's opened my eyes to the damage that discrimination causes. I've learned so much, and I'm committed to doing better." He outlined his plan for the hotel, his voice filled with determination. "Moving forward, the Oak Ridge will implement comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for all staff. We'll be partnering with local community organizations to create job opportunities for underrepresented groups, and we'll be reviewing all our policies to ensure they promote equality and respect for all our guests and employees." Michael looked directly into the cameras. "To Ms. Williams, and to anyone else who has ever felt unwelcome or disrespected at our hotel, I offer my heartfelt apology. I can't change the past, but I promise to work tirelessly to make the Oak Ridge a place where everyone feels valued and respected." As he finished speaking, the room fell silent. Then, slowly, a smattering of applause began, growing louder. Michael saw tears in the eyes of some staff members, and nods of approval from the community leaders present. He stepped away from the podium, feeling both drained and hopeful. This was just the beginning of a long journey, but for the first time, Michael felt ready to face the challenges ahead. In the weeks following his public apology, Michael threw himself into the task of transforming the Oak Ridge Hotel. He knew that words alone weren't enough. Real change required action. Michael started by organizing a series of meetings with Grace and other community leaders. They sat around a large table in the hotel's conference room, poring over the hotel's policies and practices. "We need to make sure these changes aren't just surface level," Grace said, her eyes scanning a document. "They need to create real opportunities and foster genuine inclusivity." Michael nodded, taking notes. "I agree completely. What do you think about creating a mentorship program for young people from underserved communities?" The group discussed various ideas, from revamping hiring practices to partnering with local minority-owned businesses. Michael listened intently, soaking in every suggestion. As the days passed, the hotel began to transform. New faces appeared among the staff, bringing fresh perspectives and experiences. Michael made a point of getting to know each new employee personally, learning their stories and understanding their challenges. One afternoon, Michael stood in the lobby watching as a group of high school students from the community center toured the hotel. They were part of a new program designed to introduce young people to careers in hospitality. "This could be you one day," he overheard a tour guide saying. "We're always looking for bright, motivated individuals to join our team." The student's eyes widened with excitement, and Michael felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was what real change looked like. But not everyone was thrilled with the new direction. Some longtime employees grumbled about the changes, and a few regular guests expressed their displeasure. "Mr. Thompson," one elderly patron approached him one day, "I've been coming to this hotel for 30 years. I'm not sure I like all these changes." Michael took a deep breath before responding. "Change can be uncomfortable, Mrs. Harrington, but I believe these changes are making our hotel better, more welcoming to everyone. I hope you'll give it a chance." Despite the challenges, Michael remained committed to his new path. He worked long hours, meeting with community organizations, revising policies, and ensuring that every aspect of the hotel reflected their new commitment to diversity and inclusion. As the weeks turned into months, Michael's vision for the Oak Ridge Hotel continued to evolve. He realized that to truly make a lasting impact, he needed to forge a stronger connection between the hotel and the community center that had changed his life. One sunny morning, Michael invited Grace to meet him at the hotel. They sat in his office, the view of the city sprawling before them through the large windows. "Grace, I've been thinking," Michael began, his voice filled with excitement. "What if we created a formal partnership between the hotel and the community center?" Grace's eyes lit up. "That sounds wonderful, Michael. What did you have in mind?" Michael leaned forward, his hands gesturing as he spoke. "I want to launch a program that provides job training and employment opportunities for underprivileged youth. We could teach them about hospitality, customer service, and all aspects of hotel management." Grace nodded enthusiastically. That could make a real difference in so many lives. Together, they spent hours hammering out the details of the program. They decided to start with a small group of 10 young people from the community center. The program would include classroom training at the center, followed by hands-on experience at the hotel. When they announced the partnership to the hotel staff and the community center, the response was overwhelmingly positive. The first group of trainees arrived at the hotel a few weeks later, their faces a mix of nervousness and excitement. Michael personally welcomed each of them. "Welcome to the Oak Ridge Hotel," he said warmly. "This is more than just a job opportunity. It's a chance for you to build a career, to grow, and to show the world what you're capable of." As the program got underway, Michael and Grace worked tirelessly to ensure its success. They faced challenges along the way. Some trainees struggled with the demands of the job, while others needed extra support to build their confidence. But with each passing day, Michael saw the impact of their efforts. The young trainees began to flourish, their skills improving, and their confidence growing. The hotel staff embraced their new roles as mentors, taking pride in sharing their knowledge and experience. As Michael's new program gained momentum, not everyone at the Oak Ridge Hotel embraced the changes with open arms. Some staff members and longtime guests began to voice their concerns, creating a new set of challenges for Michael to navigate. One morning, as Michael walked through the lobby, he overheard a conversation between two regular guests. "It's not the same anymore," one of them said, shaking his head. "All these new faces. It doesn't feel as exclusive as it used to." Michael felt a pang in his chest, but he reminded himself of the importance of his mission. He approached the guests with a warm smile. "Good morning, gentlemen. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on our recent changes." The men looked surprised, but the older of the two spoke up. "Well, Mr. Thompson, we've been coming here for years. We're just not sure about all these new people." Michael took a deep breath. "I understand change can be difficult," he said gently. "But I believe these changes are making our hotel even better. Would you be open to meeting some of our new staff members? I think you'll find they're quite exceptional." The men exchanged glances but reluctantly agreed. Michael introduced them to Jamal, one of the young trainees who had shown remarkable progress. Jamal's politeness and enthusiasm seemed to soften the guest's stance somewhat. Later that day, Michael faced resistance from within his own team. During a staff meeting, Sarah, a longtime employee, voiced her concerns. "Michael, I'm worried about the hotel's reputation," she said, her voice tense. "Some of our high-profile guests have been complaining. They say the hotel doesn't feel as elite anymore." Michael looked around the room, noting the mix of uncomfortable and supportive faces. He stood up, his voice firm but kind. "I understand these changes might feel unsettling," he began, "but I want you all to remember something. Our job isn't just about maintaining an image of exclusivity. It's about providing exceptional service to all our guests regardless of their background." He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "The young people we're training are bringing fresh energy and perspectives to our team. They're helping us grow and improve. And isn't that what we've always strived for? To be the best?" As Michael continued to face resistance, he found himself doubting his decisions. The weight of the changes he'd implemented felt heavy on his shoulders. Just when he thought he might buckle under the pressure, an unexpected ally emerged. One afternoon, as Michael was dealing with yet another complaint from a disgruntled guest, he noticed Mr. Carter striding purposefully through the lobby. The philanthropist's presence immediately commanded attention, and Michael felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Mr. Carter approached Michael with a warm smile. "Michael, my boy," he said, his voice carrying across the lobby. "I've been hearing about the wonderful changes you've been making here at Oak Ridge. I must say I'm impressed." Michael blinked in surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. It hasn't been easy, but—" "Of course it hasn't," Mr. Carter interrupted, his voice booming. "Change never is, but it's necessary, and you're doing the right thing." As they spoke, a small crowd began to gather. Mr. Carter seemed to notice this and raised his voice even more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I want you all to know that what's happening here at Oak Ridge is nothing short of revolutionary. Michael Thompson is setting an example for the entire hospitality industry." Michael felt a lump form in his throat as Mr. Carter continued. "This hotel isn't just providing luxury anymore. It's providing opportunity. It's bridging gaps and changing lives, and let me tell you, that's the kind of establishment I want to support." The lobby fell silent as Mr. Carter's words sank in. Then, slowly, a smattering of applause began. It grew louder, spreading through the crowd until the entire lobby was filled with the sound of clapping hands and murmurs of approval. Michael stood there, overwhelmed by the sudden show of support. He saw Sarah, the skeptical employee, nodding thoughtfully. The two regular guests who had complained earlier were whispering to each other, their expressions softening. Mr. Carter turned back to Michael, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Keep going, son," he said softly. "You're making a difference." Michael stood in his office, gazing out the window at the bustling city below. The events of the past few months played through his mind like a movie. He remembered the man he used to be, rigid, judgmental, and closed-minded. A small smile tugged at his lips as he realized how far he'd come. The community center flashed in his thoughts. The faces of the children he'd worked with, especially young Jamal, were etched in his memory. He recalled Grace's kindness and patience, even in the face of his initial prejudice. These experiences had changed him profoundly. Michael's eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk. It was a group picture from the community center, taken on his last day of volunteering. The genuine smiles on everyone's faces, including his own, spoke volumes about the connections he'd made. He picked up the frame, running his thumb over the glass. "I never thought I'd find such joy in a place I once looked down on," he murmured to himself. The sound of laughter from the lobby drifted into his office. It was a diverse group of new employees, hired through the program he'd started with Grace. Their presence in the hotel was a constant reminder of the positive changes he'd implemented. Michael set the photo down and straightened his tie. He felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he now recognized as purpose. The hotel was no longer just a business to him. It was a platform for change, a place where he could make a real difference in people's lives. As he prepared to leave his office for a meeting, Michael paused at the door. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his newfound responsibility. But unlike before, when such pressure would have made him anxious, he now felt invigorated. "We're just getting started," he said softly, a determined glint in his eye. With renewed energy and commitment, Michael stepped out of his office, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in his mission to create a more inclusive and impactful Oak Ridge Hotel. The grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge Hotel buzzed with excitement. Colorful balloons and streamers adorned the walls, and a large banner read, "Congratulations, graduates." Michael Thompson stood at the back of the room, watching as people filed in for the ceremony. This was the day he'd been looking forward to for months, the graduation of the first class from the hotel's job training program. As he scanned the crowd, he saw familiar faces from the community center mixed with hotel staff and local dignitaries. Grace Williams, looking elegant in a vibrant blue dress, caught his eye and gave him a warm smile. She made her way over to him, her eyes shining with pride. "Can you believe it, Michael?" she said, squeezing his arm. "Look at all these people here to support our graduates." Michael nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "It's amazing," he managed to say. The ceremony began, and Michael took his place on the stage. As he looked out at the sea of faces, he saw hope and determination in the eyes of the graduates. These were people who had been given a chance, and they had seized it with both hands. One by one, the graduates walked across the stage to receive their certificates. Michael shook each hand, feeling a swell of emotion with every smile and thank you. He remembered many of their stories: single mothers, former gang members, high school dropouts. Now they stood tall, ready to start their new careers. When Carlos, the black teenager who had touched Michael's heart at the community center, stepped onto the stage, Michael couldn't hold back his tears. Carlos had grown into a confident young man, and his grin was infectious as he accepted his certificate. As the last graduate left the stage, the room erupted in applause. Michael looked out at the crowd, overwhelmed by the joy and pride radiating from every corner. He saw tears in the eyes of family members, heard the cheers of friends, and felt the palpable sense of accomplishment that filled the air. In that moment, Michael realized the true impact of what they had achieved. This wasn't just about job training or hotel operations. It was about changing lives, opening doors, and building a community. The Oak Ridge Hotel had become more than just a luxury establishment. It was now a beacon of hope and opportunity. Michael stood at the podium, his heart full of gratitude and purpose. The applause had died down, but the energy in the room remained electric. He looked out at the sea of faces, each one a reminder of the journey he had taken. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady and warm. "When we started this program, I couldn't have imagined the impact it would have. Not just on our graduates, but on all of us at the Oak Ridge Hotel and on me personally." He paused, catching Grace's eye in the crowd. She nodded encouragingly, and he continued. "This journey has taught me more than I could have ever hoped to learn. It's shown me the power of second chances, the strength of community, and the importance of seeing the potential in every person. As Michael spoke, he could feel the respect and admiration from those around him. It was a far cry from the man he had been just a year ago. The cold, prejudiced hotel manager was gone, replaced by someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. After the ceremony, Michael and Grace found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. Local business owners approached them, eager to learn how they could implement similar programs. Other hotel managers, once skeptical of Michael's new direction, now sought his advice. "Michael," Grace said, pulling him aside for a moment, "I've been thinking. What we've done here, it doesn't have to stop at the Oak Ridge. We could help other businesses do the same." Michael's eyes lit up. "You're right," he said, excitement building in his voice. "We could create a template, offer guidance. We could change the whole industry." Over the next few months, Michael and Grace worked tirelessly to expand their program. They reached out to other hotels, restaurants, and businesses in the area. They held workshops, sharing their experiences and offering support to those who wanted to follow in their footsteps. The community embraced Michael's transformation. He was no longer just the manager of a luxury hotel, but a beloved figure known for his compassion and dedication to making a difference. Children from the community center would wave to him on the street, and former program graduates would stop by the hotel to share their successes. As the sun set on another bustling day at the Oak Ridge Hotel, the grand ballroom buzzed with excitement. The space, once a symbol of exclusivity, now teemed with a diverse crowd of guests, staff, and community members. They had all gathered to celebrate the one-year anniversary of the hotel's transformation. Michael stood near the entrance, greeting people with warm handshakes and genuine smiles. He marveled at how much had changed in just a year. The hotel lobby, once cold and intimidating, now felt welcoming to all who entered. Grace appeared at his side, beaming with pride. "Look at what we've accomplished, Michael," she said, gesturing to the crowd. Michael nodded, his eyes misty. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible." The room fell quiet as Mr. Carter took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "a year ago, I witnessed an incident in this very hotel that left me disheartened. But today, I stand before you filled with hope and joy." He went on to recount the hotel's journey, praising Michael's transformation and Grace's unwavering belief in the power of second chances. As he spoke, Michael felt a lump form in his throat. When Mr. Carter finished, he invited Michael and Grace to join him on stage. The applause was deafening as they made their way forward. Michael stepped up to the microphone, his voice thick with emotion. "This hotel has always been about hospitality," he said. "But now we understand that true hospitality means welcoming everyone with open arms and open hearts." He turned to Grace, taking her hand. "None of this would have been possible without Grace's compassion and guidance. She saw the potential for change when I couldn't see it myself." Grace squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And none of it would have happened if Michael hadn't been willing to learn and grow," she added. "This is what can happen when we choose to see the humanity in each other." As they looked out at the crowd, they saw faces from all walks of life. Hotel staff standing shoulder to shoulder with community center volunteers, business leaders chatting with program graduates, and children from the after-school program playing together without a care in the world. The Oak Ridge Hotel had become more than just a place to stay. It was now a beacon of hope, a living example of what could be achieved when people came together with open minds and open hearts. If you were publicly humiliated like Grace, would you forgive your offender? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I am spending hours upon hours writing these heartwarming stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going.